There is a stage on the inner path where nothing dramatic happens on the surface, yet everything begins to carry more weight within. Life continues as before. Faith is still present, and the outward form of practice remains intact. But the heart is no longer lifted by comfort or reassurance. What once felt supportive now feels neutral. What once inspired movement now feels quiet. The heart is not broken, yet it no longer leans on ease. The mind keeps offering explanations, reasons, and interpretations, but they feel thin, as though they no longer reach the depth of what is being felt. Familiar ideas stop satisfying. Familiar answers stop settling the heart. There is a growing sense that something essential is being asked, even though nothing external has changed. This is the moment when the journey stops rewarding effort and begins asking for honesty. The path no longer responds to striving, repetition, or performance. It responds only to the truth. Here, progress does not feel encouraging, and faith no longer entertains the self. It simply remains. It is at this point that many quietly step away, not because they are weak and not because they have failed, but because the path has stopped offering what the self once needed to stay engaged. What remains now is sincerity without comfort, presence without reward, and a choice that cannot be disguised as distraction. There comes a phase on the inner path when growth no longer announces itself through visible change. Earlier, progress felt tangible. Effort produced a response. Practice brought reassurance. Movement felt rewarded by clarity, motivation, or emotional confirmation. At this stage, all of that begins to fade. The heart continues, yet nothing seems to advance in the way it once did. Instead of moving forward, it feels as though something within is being slowly taken apart. This experience can be deeply confusing because it contradicts how progress is usually understood. Progress is expected to feel lighter, clearer, or more empowering. Here, it feels heavier and quieter. The heart does not feel inspired, yet it does not feel lost either. It feels suspended, as though it is being asked to remain present, while familiar supports are quietly removed. The heart notices that activity no longer reassures it. Actions that once brought comfort now feel neutral. Repetition no longer produces relief. The sense of momentum that once made effort feel meaningful has disappeared. This does not mean the heart has stopped caring. It means the heart is no longer being motivated by reward. What disappears first is the feedback loop. Previously, effort produced a feeling that confirmed direction. Now, effort produces silence. This silence unsettles the self, because the self learned to rely on response as proof that it was on the right path. When the response fades, doubt arises. Not doubt about belief itself, but doubt about whether one is still moving at all. This doubt is subtle. The heart does not question what it values. It questions where it is going. It wonders whether it has missed something, done something wrong, or reached a dead end. The absence of reassurance is interpreted as absence of progress. Yet, what is actually happening is not absence, but transition. Growth changes form. Instead of adding layers, something is being removed. Habits of dependence are loosening. Expectations are being stripped away. The heart is learning how to remain without leaning. This kind of growth does not feel like advancement because it does not expand the self. It reduces it. The dismantling that occurs here is quiet. There is no clear moment when something breaks. Instead, old motivations weaken. Old reasons lose strength. The heart no longer wants to perform or prove. This can feel disorienting because performance and proof were once the markers of progress. Without them, the heart feels unsure of how to measure itself. Many mistake this stage for regression. It feels like standing still because there is no sense of accumulation. Nothing new seems to be gained. Yet standing still here is not stagnation. It is stabilization. The heart is being asked to stop moving in circles and to learn how to stand without movement. The loss of familiar signs creates discomfort. When encouragement disappears, the self grows restless. It wants something to point to, something to show that effort still matters. The heart feels empty of affirmation, and this emptiness is often misread as failure. But failure involves loss of direction. This stage involves loss of distraction. Refinement often feels like stagnation because it removes what made growth visible. Earlier, progress was felt through emotion, clarity, or enthusiasm. Now, progress occurs beneath the surface. The heart is being reshaped internally without external signals. This internal work is subtle and slow, making it difficult to recognize. Another reason this stage feels like standing still is because the heart is learning restraint. Previously, movement was encouraged. Now, stillness is required. Stillness does not feel productive to the self, which equates value with action. Yet restraint is essential for depth. Without it, the heart cannot settle. The absence of reassurance tests patience. The heart must continue without knowing whether continuation is producing results. This is uncomfortable because it removes control. The self wants to manage progress. This stage refuses management. It demands trust without evidence. It is important to understand that this stage does not remove faith. Faith remains intact. What is removed is dependency on feeling. The heart learns that belief does not need constant reinforcement to exist. This realization is stabilizing, even though it feels unsettling at first. The heart also becomes more honest here. Without rewards to chase, motivation must come from sincerity. The heart continues not because it feels good, but because it feels true. This shift marks a deeper level of commitment. Commitment no longer depends on satisfaction. Standing still while something is being dismantled requires endurance. The heart must tolerate uncertainty without rushing to escape it. Many leave at this point because leaving restores familiar feedback. Returning to earlier patterns brings comfort, even if it limits depth. Those who remain begin to notice a subtle change. The inner noise quiets. The need to measure progress weakens. The heart becomes less reactive. This does not feel like success, but it feels stable. Stability is the foundation upon which clarity eventually forms. This stage is not about moving forward quickly. It is about removing what prevents true movement. Once the dismantling is complete, direction returns naturally. But until then, the heart must learn how to stand without reassurance. When progress no longer feels like progress, it is often because growth has changed direction. It is no longer outward, it is inward. What is being built cannot be seen yet, but what is being removed was essential to remove. This phase does not last forever. It lasts as long as it needs to. Rushing it prolongs it. Accepting it allows it to complete its work. What feels like standing still is often the deepest form of movement the heart will ever know. In the earlier stages of the inner path, encouragement comes naturally. Effort feels noticed. Practice brings a response. The heart experiences motivation through emotion, insight, or a sense of spiritual momentum that confirms it is moving in the right direction. These inner rewards are not wrong or unnecessary. They serve a purpose. They help the heart begin the journey, sustain discipline, and build confidence that the path is real. During those stages, inner stimulation becomes a guide. Feeling inspired feels like progress. Emotional movement feels like closeness. Moments of clarity feel like proof that effort is working. The heart learns to associate these experiences with correctness, and over time, this association becomes strong. The self begins to expect a response each time it shows up. Something shifts. The encouragement that once arrived consistently begins to fade. The heart continues its practices, but the emotional reward no longer follows. The sense of momentum weakens. The inner excitement quiets. What once felt alive now feels neutral. This change is often subtle at first, but over time it becomes unmistakable. The heart is still present. Faith is still intact, yet the familiar feeling of being inwardly rewarded disappears. There is no applause, no emotional confirmation, no inner signal saying, "You are doing well." This silence is deeply unsettling for the self, because the self has learned to measure correctness through stimulation. The self struggles here because it equates feeling with truth. When feeling disappears, the self assumes truth has been lost. It begins to question whether the path is still valid, whether effort still matters, or whether something has gone wrong internally. This question is not rebellion. It is confusion born from dependence. What is actually happening is not loss of direction, but loss of dependency. The heart is being weaned from relying on inner reward as motivation. The path no longer reinforces itself through feeling, because feeling has completed its role. What remains must now be carried without stimulation. This stage is uncomfortable because it removes a familiar source of energy. The heart must continue without emotional fuel. The self feels drained, not because something is wrong, but because something essential has been taken away. What has been taken away is not faith. It relies on sensation. The removal of inner reward exposes how deeply the self depended on experience rather than sincerity. As long as effort produced feeling, the self felt confident. When effort produces silence, the self feels insecure. This insecurity reveals the hidden expectation that practice should always feel rewarding. Yet this expectation was never meant to remain. Inner reward was a guide, not a foundation. It was meant to support early movement, not define the destination. If the heart remained dependent on feeling, it would never mature beyond seeking experience. This is why the loss of inner reward is necessary. The heart must learn to stand without emotional reinforcement. It must continue without being lifted by sensation. This teaches sincerity. The heart continues not because it feels good, but because it feels true. This shift is profound. It separates intention from gratification. The heart learns that commitment does not require excitement. Faith does not need stimulation to exist. Truth does not announce itself through emotion alone. Many turn back at this stage because returning restores inner reward. Familiar practices begin to feel exciting again. The self feels affirmed. But this affirmation comes at the cost of depth. Staying requires endurance without feedback. The silence that replaces inner reward feels empty at first. The heart wonders whether it has lost something precious. In reality, it has gained space. Space for faith to exist without performance. Space for sincerity to replace self-confirmation. Another reason this stage feels difficult is that the heart must confront itself honestly. Without emotional reward, motivation is revealed. The heart sees whether it is seeking truth or seeking feelings. This realization can be humbling, but it is also clarifying. The loss of inner reward also changes how effort is experienced. effort becomes quieter. It no longer feels heroic or special. It feels ordinary. This ordinariness removes spiritual pride. The heart stops measuring itself against imagined standards of advancement. What remains after inner reward fades is a simpler faith, a steadier commitment, a quieter presence. This presence does not fluctuate with feeling. It remains even when nothing seems to be happening. The self resists this simplicity because it feels unimpressive. There is nothing to point to, nothing to display internally. Yet this simplicity is exactly what allows depth to form. Without distraction, the heart can finally settle. The absence of inner reward teaches patience. The heart learns how to remain without constant confirmation. This patience strengthens endurance. It builds a form of stability that cannot be shaken by emotional fluctuation. The heart begins to recognize that silence itself is not absence, it is neutrality. It allows sincerity to stand on its own. The heart no longer asks, "How do I feel?" It asks, "Am I present?" This stage does not last forever, but it lasts long enough to reshape the heart's relationship with effort. Once dependence on feeling is released, clarity begins to return in a different form. It returns as steadiness rather than excitement, as grounding rather than stimulation. The loss of inner reward is not punishment, it is maturing. It removes what the heart leaned on so that it can learn to stand. What feels like dryness is actually refinement. What feels like loss is actually freedom. And what feels like silence is the space where sincerity learns to remain. This stage feels threatening not because something harmful is happening, but because something familiar is quietly dissolving. The self, which has relied on structure, recognition, and definition, begins to lose its reference points. Earlier on the path, identity provided orientation. The heart knew who it was trying to be, how it appeared to itself, and what role it occupied within its own spiritual story. Now, those markers begin to loosen. Roles that once felt meaningful no longer hold the same weight. Labels that once provided reassurance no longer feel necessary. Even the inner image of being a seeker, a believer, or someone progressing along a path begins to soften. This does not happen abruptly. It unfolds gradually, creating a sense of unfamiliarity rather than collapse. The heart continues, but the self no longer recognizes itself in the same way. The self feels threatened here because identity was its anchor. Identity offered stability, purpose, and direction. It allowed the self to measure progress, compare stages, and feel secure in knowing where it stood. When identity weakens, the self experiences a form of groundlessness. It feels as though it no longer knows how to locate itself within the journey. This exposure is unsettling. Without an image to maintain, the self feels seen without protection. There is no longer a role to perform or a position to defend. The heart cannot rely on being someone on the path. It must simply be present. This presence feels vulnerable because it removes the distance created by identity. Many mistake this loss of identity for loss of direction. The self assumes that if it no longer knows who it is supposed to be, it must also no longer know where it is going. This assumption feels logical because identity once provided orientation. But identity was never meant to be the guide. It was a tool for early stages, not a permanent structure. Identity organizes experience, but it also limits it. As long as the heart is invested in maintaining an image, it cannot fully open to transformation. Identity creates boundaries around what is acceptable, familiar, and safe. At this stage, those boundaries begin to dissolve, and the self resists because it senses loss of control. The threat felt here is not annihilation, it is disorientation. The self does not disappear, but it no longer occupies the center. The heart is being invited to exist without defining itself constantly. This invitation feels frightening because the self equates definition with existence. Without labels, it fears being lost. Another reason the self feels threatened is that identity provides comfort through comparison. Knowing who one is allows the self to measure itself against imagined standards or others on similar paths. When identity loosens, comparison loses relevance. The self cannot locate itself within a hierarchy or narrative. This absence removes validation, which the self unconsciously depended on. The heart begins to experience itself without explanation. It is no longer trying to fit into a story. It is simply awareness. This awareness feels unfamiliar because it does not provide feedback. There is nothing to hold on to, nothing to improve, and nothing to display. The self experiences this as exposure because it cannot hide behind roles. Many turn back here because returning restores identity. Old labels become meaningful again. Familiar narratives reappear. The self regains its sense of place and purpose. This feels relieving, even though it limits depth. Staying requires the self to tolerate not knowing who it is in the way it once did. This stage also reveals how much effort was invested in maintaining an inner image. Without that effort, energy feels unstructured. The heart no longer organizes itself around becoming something. This creates a feeling of emptiness, which is often misunderstood as loss. In reality, this emptiness is space. Space is necessary for transformation, but it feels uncomfortable to the self. The self prefers form over openness. Form feels manageable. Openness feels risky. Yet without openness, the heart cannot be reshaped. Identity must loosen so that something more authentic can emerge. The heart begins to realize that identity was not providing direction, it was providing familiarity. Direction comes from alignment, not definition. As identity fades, alignment becomes possible. The heart no longer asks, "Who am I on this path?" It begins to ask, "Where is truth asking me to stand?" This shift feels threatening because it removes the ability to predict oneself. The self no longer knows how it will respond, because responses are no longer filtered through an image. This unpredictability feels dangerous to the self, even though it is necessary for honesty. The loss of identity also removes spiritual pride. Without an image to uphold, there is no one to admire. This humbling feels uncomfortable, but it brings sincerity. The heart no longer seeks to be recognized, even by itself. It simply remains. The heart begins to sense relief. Without the pressure of being someone, it can finally rest. The self realizes that it does not disappear when identity dissolves. It becomes quieter, lighter, and less defensive. What remains is presence without performance. Identity was never meant to be permanent. It was scaffolding. Once the structure is strong enough, the scaffolding must be removed. This removal feels like instability only because the self does not yet trust what has been built. Those who remain through this stage discover that direction does not come from knowing who they are, but from being willing to stand without needing to know. This willingness allows truth to guide the heart more directly than any role or label ever could. The self feels threatened here because it senses its influence diminishing. But this diminishment is not destruction, it is recalibration. The heart is learning to exist without being centered on itself. What feels like loss of identity is actually the release of limitations. What feels like exposure is actually honesty. And what feels like a threat is the doorway to a deeper way of being. This is why many turn back here. And this is why those who remain are changed. Ibni Arabi spoke about moments on the inner path that do not resemble progress as it is usually imagined. These moments arrive when the seeker reaches a subtle limit, not of ability, but of usefulness. Effort has not failed, yet it no longer produces closeness. Practice continues. Intention remains sincere, but the familiar sense of advancement begins to dissolve. This is the point where striving itself becomes excess. The heart discovers something unexpected. Movement is no longer the way forward. Earlier, effort created orientation. Repetition created stability. Seeking created direction. But now, the same actions that once brought nearness begin to feel heavy, even obstructive. The heart senses that continuing to push would disturb something delicate that is forming within. This is not because the path has ended. It is because the relationship to the path has changed. Ibni Arabi described this moment as one where the seeker reaches the boundary of what effort can accomplish. Beyond this boundary, effort no longer serves as a bridge. It becomes noise, filling space that now requires silence. Intention does not disappear here. In fact, intention becomes purer. What fades is the urge to manufacture closeness through action. The heart no longer tries to arrive. It begins to realize that arrival cannot be produced. What remains is a quiet readiness rather than an active pursuit. This pause is often misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like stagnation. From the inside, it feels like restraint. The seeker may worry that something essential has been lost, that passion has weakened, or direction has blurred. Yet Ibni Arabi emphasized that this pause is not abandonment. It is refined. The path itself removes the need to chase it. Chasing implies distance. It assumes separation between seeker and sought. At this stage, that assumption begins to dissolve. The heart senses that movement toward truth implies that truth is elsewhere. The pause corrects this assumption. It teaches the heart that closeness is not achieved by advancing, but by ceasing to stand apart. What approaches now cannot be reached by force, because force maintains separation. Force requires an object to be attained. What is drawing near at this stage does not exist as an object. It exists as a presence. Presence cannot be grasped. It can only be received. Ibni Arabi pointed toward a subtle reversal that occurs here. Earlier, the seeker moved toward truth. Now, the seeker must allow truth to reveal itself without interference. This reversal feels unsettling because it removes the familiar role of effort. The heart no longer knows how to participate actively. It must learn how to remain available. Availability is different from passivity. Passivity disengages. Availability stays awake. The heart remains attentive without directing. It listens without demanding. It waits without expectation. This posture is difficult because it provides no sense of control. The self cannot measure progress or claim achievement. This is why many struggle at this point. The self equates sincerity with action. When action pauses, the self assumes sincerity has weakened. Ibni Arabi challenged this assumption by showing that sincerity deepens when the need to act dissolves. The heart becomes sincere not by doing more, but by interfering less. This stage also reveals the limits of intention when intention is tied to outcome. The heart may still intend closeness, but intention alone cannot bring what is already near. The pause teaches the heart that closeness is not created, it is recognized. Ibni Arabi described this as a kind of spiritual courtesy. The seeker steps back so that truth may step forward. This stepping back is not withdrawal from the path. It is respect for the nature of what is being approached. Some realities cannot be reached by effort because effort imposes direction. These realities require receptivity. This moment reshapes the heart's understanding of trust. Trust no longer means continuing to act despite uncertainty. It means allowing stillness without fear. The heart must trust that stopping does not mean losing. It means yielding to a deeper movement that cannot be controlled. The pause also exposes how much identity was attached to seeking. The self may feel useless without striving. It may feel invisible without effort. Ibni Arabi pointed out that this discomfort reveals attachment, not failure. What must be released is not intention, but ownership of the path. The path no longer responds to effort because effort has completed its work. What remains is openness. The heart learns how to stand without pushing, how to remain without demanding, and how to listen without shaping what it hears. This stage is quiet because it does not produce experiences. It produces readiness. The heart becomes capable of receiving without distortion. It stops trying to approach truth and allows truth to approach it in its own way. Ibni Arabi emphasized that this moment cannot be rushed. Any attempt to force movement reintroduces distance. The heart must remain where it is without trying to improve the situation. Improvement belongs to effort. Transformation belongs to surrender. This is why the path seems to disappear here. It has not vanished. It has become internal. Direction is no longer outward. It is inward. The heart is no longer traveling. It is being shaped. Those who remain through this pause discover something unexpected. The absence of striving brings clarity without explanation. Presence replaces effort. Nearness is felt without pursuit. What was once chased is now encountered. This does not happen dramatically. There is no announcement. The heart simply realizes that it is no longer trying to arrive. It is already standing where arrival no longer applies. Ibni Arabi pointed toward this moment, not as an ending, but as a deep transition. The seeker does not stop the journey. The journey stops being a journey. What approaches now cannot be reached by force because it was never distant. What remains is not effort, but awareness. And awareness does not move forward. It opens. This is the threshold Ibni Arabi pointed toward, where striving gives way to truth, revealing itself. And the heart learns that closeness was never something to be achieved, only something to be allowed. The difficulty does not come from pain, confusion, or visible struggle. It comes from tension that is quiet, constant, and draining. Nothing feels dramatically wrong, yet nothing feels settled. The heart senses that it is being asked to remain where it is, but it cannot clearly explain why. There is no obvious reward for staying, no promise of resolution, and no sign indicating how long this state will last. This combination creates a pressure that slowly wears the self down. The heart feels a pull to remain, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Something feels true here, even though it feels uncomfortable. At the same time, the self sees no benefit in staying. There is no relief to anticipate, no transformation to point toward, and no reassurance that endurance will lead to improvement. This creates a split within. One part of the heart feels drawn inward, while another part wants to escape simply to feel movement again. This tension is exhausting because it offers no release. Earlier struggles had outlets. Effort produced progress. Pain eventually softened. Questions eventually led to answers. Here, nothing resolves itself quickly. The heart is asked to stay present without being entertained, rewarded, or comforted. For the self, this feels unbearable because it removes all familiar motivations. Uncertainty is the core challenge here. The self can tolerate hardship when it understands its purpose. It can endure struggle when it sees progress. It can accept sacrifice when it expects reward. But uncertainty without explanation leaves the self disoriented. It does not know how to justify staying, and without justification, endurance feels meaningless. This is why the self prefers struggle with reward over stillness without explanation. Struggle feels active. It gives the self something to do. It creates the sense of earning progress. Stillness, by contrast, feels unproductive. It offers no visible evidence that anything is happening. The self interprets this as wasted time, even though the heart senses otherwise. Turning back becomes tempting because it restores familiarity. Familiar struggles return. Familiar rewards reappear. Even familiar limitations feel comforting because they are known. The self would rather deal with problems it understands than remain in a space it cannot explain. Turning back feels like relief, even if it means giving up depth. This decision is rarely dramatic. Most do not consciously choose to abandon the path. They simply drift back toward what feels manageable. They return to patterns that provide feedback, identity, and stimulation. The tension disappears, replaced by movement and reassurance. Yet something subtle is lost in the process. The heart often feels this loss quietly. It recognizes that turning back did not bring resolution, only comfort. Familiarity returns, but the deeper pull remains unresolved. This is why the tension is so significant. It marks a genuine crossroads, even though it does not announce itself as one. The exhaustion felt here comes from holding two opposing needs at once. The heart wants to remain honest. The self wants relief. Holding both without resolution creates strain. The self grows tired of waiting for clarity. The heart grows tired of pretending clarity is required. This tension also exposes how deeply the self relies on explanation. The self wants reasons, timelines, and outcomes. It wants to know what staying will achieve. When none are offered, the self feels deprived. It assumes that what cannot be explained cannot be trusted. Yet what is happening here does not operate on explanation. It operates on readiness. Readiness cannot be scheduled. It cannot be proven. It can only be allowed. This reality frustrates the self, which thrives on control. Another reason this tension is unbearable is that it removes comparison. Earlier stages allowed the self to measure progress against past experiences or imagined standards. Here, comparison no longer works. There is nothing to compare. The heart stands alone in its experience. This isolation intensifies discomfort. The self also resists because it feels unnecessary to stay. Nothing appears broken. Life continues. Faith remains. Practices are intact. The self asks, why endure this when nothing is obviously wrong? The heart does not answer in words. It answers in feeling. This non-verbal knowing frustrates the self even more. Many leave because they mistake lack of reassurance for lack of meaning. They assume that if something mattered, it would feel clearer or more rewarding. This assumption is false, but it is powerful. It convinces the self that staying is pointless. Staying requires a kind of patience that does not wait for improvement. It waits without expectation. This patience feels unnatural because it offers no payoff. The self has no reason to endure except honesty. Honesty is not a strong motivator for the self. Comfort is. Turning back feels like choosing ease over strain. It feels sensible. It feels responsible. Yet what is chosen is not ease, but familiarity. Familiarity feels safe because it is predictable, even when it limits growth. The heart understands this difference, but the self resists it. The self believes safety comes from knowing what to expect. The heart learns that safety comes from alignment. Alignment does not explain itself. It simply holds. This is why most leave here, not because the path is too hard, but because it becomes too quiet, too honest, too uninterested in reassuring the self. The tension becomes unbearable only because the self insists on resolution instead of presence. Those who remain do not do so because they are stronger. They remain because they stop demanding answers. They allow uncertainty to exist without interpreting it as failure. This allowance slowly dissolves the tension, not by resolving it, but by transforming the heart's relationship to it. The inner tension that causes most to leave is not meant to break the heart. It is meant to reveal what the heart is still negotiating. And when negotiation ends, tension softens on its own. This is the place where familiarity tempts more than truth. And this is why remaining here changes everything. What stands before the heart at this stage is often misunderstood. It feels immovable, heavy, and final, so the mind assumes it is a barrier. But this place is not a wall meant to stop the heart. It is a threshold meant to change how the heart stands. A wall blocks movement. A threshold invites transition. The difference is subtle, yet everything depends on recognizing it. On one side of this threshold is effort shaped by desire. Desire to arrive, to feel progress, to gain reassurance, to become something recognizable. This effort is not wrong. It carried the heart through earlier stages. It provided motivation, structure, and direction. But effort, driven by desire, eventually reaches its limit. It can only take the heart so far before it begins to repeat itself. On the other side of the threshold is a different kind of change. Not improvement, not achievement, not spiritual success, but transformation rooted in sincerity. Sincerity does not push. It does not calculate outcomes. It does not bargain with the future. It remains because remaining feels true, even when nothing is gained. The threshold exists because effort has completed its role. The heart has learned discipline, endurance, and intention. Now, it must learn honesty. Honesty cannot be forced. It emerges when the heart stops negotiating with itself. Negotiation sounds like waiting for better conditions, clearer signs, or emotional confirmation. The threshold asks the heart to stop asking for permission to be sincere. Crossing this threshold does not require strength. Strength belongs to effort. This moment requires something quieter. It requires the willingness to remain without explanation. The heart must accept that clarity may not arrive on its own terms. It must stay without demanding proof that staying is worthwhile. This is deeply uncomfortable for the self. The self prefers contracts. It wants assurance that patience will be rewarded, that endurance will pay off, that waiting has an end point. The threshold offers none of this. It offers only presence. The heart is asked to stand without guarantees. Standing here feels exposed because there is no role to play and no action to hide behind. The heart cannot claim progress. It cannot point to effort. It cannot justify itself. All that remains is sincerity without decoration. This feels like vulnerability, but it is actually alignment. Transformation begins here, not by adding something new, but by releasing what was never essential. The heart lets go of the need to manage its own becoming. It releases the pressure to turn truth into achievement. It allows faith to exist without proving itself. The threshold also changes the heart's relationship with time. Earlier stages were marked by anticipation. Progress was expected to unfold in steps. Here, time loses urgency. The heart no longer asks when something will happen. It asks whether it can remain present now. This shift dissolves impatience at its root. Many believe transformation requires effort equal to struggle. This threshold reveals something different. Transformation requires honesty equal to stillness. It happens when the heart stops interfering with what is already unfolding beneath awareness. Remaining at this threshold feels like doing nothing, but it is not inactivity, it is restraint. The heart is learning not to rush into familiar patterns of effort. It is learning to trust that sincerity alone is sufficient to carry it forward. This is why clarity is not demanded here. Clarity would become another condition, another thing to negotiate. The threshold removes conditions. It asks the heart to remain even when the mind feels unsatisfied. The threshold also dissolves comparison. There is no way to measure this stage. No one can tell how long it will last or what it will produce. This removes the self's habit of evaluation. Without evaluation, the heart becomes simpler. What crosses this threshold is not the self, but sincerity. The self remains behind with its expectations, fears, and demands. What moves forward is the part of the heart that no longer needs to know who it is becoming. It only needs to be present. This is why transformation here is quiet. There is no sudden shift, no dramatic awakening. The heart simply finds itself less divided, less urgent, less concerned with outcomes. This subtle change reshapes everything that follows. The threshold also marks the end of bargaining. The heart no longer says, "I will remain if," or "I will trust when." It stops postponing truth. It stands without leverage. This standing is not heroic, it is honest. From this place, transformation unfolds naturally, not as improvement, but as simplification, not as gaining, but as shedding. The heart becomes lighter, not because it has achieved something, but because it is no longer carrying what does not belong. Many never recognize this threshold because it looks unremarkable. It offers no excitement, no reward, and no validation. Yet, it is the most decisive point on the path. Everything before it prepared the heart to arrive here. Everything after it flows differently. This threshold does not demand courage in the usual sense. It demands trust without evidence. It demands patience without promise. It demands presence without reassurance. This is where transformation truly begins. Not by becoming someone new, but by releasing the need to become at all. What was essential remains. What was excess falls away. And the heart steps forward not by force, but by truth. When the heart chooses to remain at this point, something begins to change in a way that cannot be undone. Nothing dramatic announces this shift. There is no sudden clarity, no emotional surge, and no visible sign that transformation has begun. Yet inwardly, a quiet rearrangement takes place. The heart no longer moves in the same way it once did, even though life on the surface may appear unchanged. One of the first changes is the weakening of the need to understand everything. Earlier, understanding felt essential. The heart wanted explanations, meanings, and clear reasons before it could rest. Questions needed answers. Confusion needed resolution. When the heart stays here, that demand slowly loses its urgency. The heart does not stop thinking, but it stops insisting that understanding must come first. It becomes willing to remain present even when things are not fully explained. Alongside this, the urge to control begins to soften. Control once felt necessary for safety, planning, managing outcomes, and anticipating difficulties gave the heart a sense of stability. Now, that instinct loosens, not because the heart has given up responsibility, but because it has recognized the limits of control. The heart understands that constant management was never providing the peace it promised. As control dissolves, tension dissolves with it. Faith also changes character here. It becomes quieter, less expressive, and less concerned with how it appears. Earlier, faith may have felt active, emotional, or visibly motivating. Now it settles into weight rather than volume. It does not announce itself, it holds. This weight gives faith stability. It no longer depends on feeling uplifted or reassured. It remains even in silence. Practice changes in a similar way. Actions become simpler. The heart no longer tries to do more in order to feel more. There is less emphasis on intensity and more emphasis on sincerity. What remains is steady, uncomplicated, and grounded. Practice no longer aims to produce a state. It becomes an expression of presence rather than a tool for achievement. The heart also stops chasing experiences. Earlier, certain states felt important: calm, clarity, inspiration, or emotional closeness were sought after and valued. Here, the heart releases the need to reach for them. It does not reject experience, but it no longer pursues it. This shift brings relief. The heart no longer measures itself by what it feels. Instead of chasing, the heart becomes available. Availability is a quiet openness without agenda. The heart remains attentive without directing what should arrive. This openness allows change to happen naturally without force or pressure. Transformation unfolds without being pushed into shape. This kind of change is not emotional. It does not come with excitement or visible signs of progress. It is structural, the way the heart relates to effort, time, and expectation reorganizes itself. Old habits of urgency weaken. Old patterns of resistance fade. The heart does not need to be convinced. It adjusts quietly. Rest also changes meaning here. Earlier, rest was something the heart hoped to earn after effort. Now rest becomes a way of standing. The heart rests while remaining engaged. This rest does not remove responsibility. It removes inner strain. The heart can carry what it needs to carry without collapsing under it. As this resting deepens, the heart begins to notice that it is no longer searching in the way it once did. The endless reaching outward softens. The desire to arrive somewhere else fades. The heart recognizes that what it was searching for was never ahead. It was beneath the noise of striving. This realization does not come as a thought. It comes as a settling. The heart feels at home in its own presence. It no longer feels displaced or restless. Even uncertainty feels bearable because the heart is no longer trying to escape it. Another irreversible change is how difficulty is experienced. Challenges still arise, uncertainty still exists, but the heart no longer meets them with panic. It meets them with steadiness. The weight of difficulty is carried differently. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable, not because it is smaller, but because the heart is no longer fragmented. This stage also brings humility. Without the need to achieve or display progress, the heart becomes simpler. There is less comparison, less self-evaluation, less concern about how the path should look. The heart accepts its own pace without judgment. Staying here does not make the heart passive. It makes it grounded. When action is needed, it arises naturally. When waiting is required, it is endured without resentment. The heart no longer swings between urgency and avoidance. It moves with discernment. Perhaps the most significant change is the sense of belonging that begins to form. The heart no longer feels like it is trying to reach something distant. It feels held within what is already present. This belonging does not depend on emotion or understanding. It exists quietly, beneath experience. This is why the transformation that happens here cannot be reversed. Once the heart learns how to remain without chasing, it cannot return to restless searching in the same way. Once it learns how to rest without explanation, it cannot return fully to dependence on control. Those who remain through this stage do not feel accomplished. They feel settled. The heart no longer needs to prove itself, even to itself. What remains is a steady presence that does not fluctuate with circumstance. The heart begins to rest where it once searched. What it was trying to find through effort reveals itself through stillness, and what once felt distant becomes quietly available. This is what happens when the heart does not turn back. Not dramatic change, but deep, lasting rearrangement. What you have reached is not a stopping point, and it is not a reward. It is a settling. The heart has learned how to remain without being carried by excitement or driven by fear. What once demanded effort now asks only for presence, and that presence changes everything quietly. Nothing here asks you to become someone new. It asks you to stop carrying what never belonged to you in the first place. When the heart releases the need to chase, explain, or control, it discovers a steadiness that cannot be taken away by circumstance. Most paths end in movement. This one ends in grounding. And from this grounding, the heart does not retreat or wander again. It moves forward differently, without noise, without strain, and without turning back.